Jake Morrison sat on the cold metal floor of his cell, counting the scratches he had made on the wall. 3 years, 2 months, and 15 days. Each mark represented another day that the Zephyrians had failed to break him. The cell was small, barely large enough for him to lie down with his arms stretched out. The walls were made of some kind of dark metal that felt warm to the touch, and a blue energy field blocked the entrance. The only furniture was a hard bench that served as both chair and bed. A slot in the wall provided water and a gray paste. That tasted like nothing but kept him alive. Morrison looked exactly like what he was, a career military officer who refused to quit. His brown hair had grown long and wild during his imprisonment, and his beard reached his chest. His clothes were the same torn uniform he had worn during the Battle of Kepler Station, now faded and patched with scraps of fabric. Despite the poor conditions, his green eyes still held the same determination that had made him a captain in the Earth Defense Fleet. The sound of heavy footsteps echoed down the corridor. Morrison knew those footsteps well. Commander Vextal was coming for another interrogation session. The alien was 7 feet tall with 4 arms and a chitinous shell that covered his entire body. His head looked like a cross between a praying mantis and a spider, with multiple eyes that could see in different directions at once. Vextal stopped in front of Morrison's cell and deactivated the energy field. 2 guards flanked him, each carrying energy weapons that could stun or kill depending on the setting. Morrison stood up slowly, brushing dust off his pants. "Good morning, Commander," Morrison said with a smile. "Ready for another fun day together?" Vextal's mandibles clicked together, and what Morrison had learned was a sign of irritation. The alien spoke through a translation device that made his voice sound like metal scraping against stone. "You will come with us, human. Today we will try something different." Morrison shrugged and walked out of his cell. He had learned long ago that resistance during transport only led to unnecessary pain. "Save your strength for when it matters," his old drill instructor used to say. They walked through corridors lined with hundreds of cells. Morrison could see other prisoners, beings from dozens of different worlds. Some were tall and thin with blue skin, others were short and furry, with large eyes. All of them looked broken in ways that Morrison refused to become. They sat in corners, stared at walls, or rocked back and forth. The fight had gone out of them, but when Morrison passed their cells, some of the prisoners looked up. Word had spread through the prison about the human who wouldn't break. He had become something of a legend, proof that the Zephyrians could be defied. The interrogation room was the same as always. White walls, bright lights, and a chair in the center with metal restraints. Various machines surrounded the chair, each designed to cause different types of pain or extract information from unwilling minds. "Sit," Vextal ordered. Morrison sat down and placed his hands on the armrests. The restraints clicked into place, automatically, holding him tight against the chair. He had been through this routine hundreds of times. "Today we will use the neural probe," Vextal announced, gesturing to a device that looked like a helmet covered in thin wires. "It will allow us to read your memories directly. Your resistance is pointless." Morrison had heard about the neural probe. Other prisoners whispered about it in fear. The device could dig through a person's mind like fingers through dirt, pulling out memories and thoughts. Most beings went insane after exposure to it. "Go ahead," Morrison said. "But I should warn you, my head is a pretty messy place. You might not like what you find in there." 2 technicians lowered the device onto Morrison's head. He felt the wires press against his skull, and then a sharp pain shot through his brain. Images flashed before his eyes, memories of Earth, of his family, of the battle that had led to his capture. But Morrison had spent 3 years preparing for this moment. He focused on his breathing, on the techniques he had learned from an old meditation book in his childhood home. He thought about his sister Kate teaching him to ride a bicycle, about his first day at the military academy, about quiet Sunday, mornings with coffee and newspapers. The technicians worked for hours trying to break through Morrison's mental defenses. Sweat poured down their faces as they increased the power of the device. Morrison's body shook and his teeth clenched, but he refused to let them deeper into his mind. Finally, one of the technicians collapsed. The other shut down the machine and stepped back, breathing hard. "Impossible," Vextal hissed. No being has ever resisted the neural probe for more than an hour. You maintained your defenses for 6 hours. Morrison raised his head and looked directly at the alien commander. Blood trickled from his nose and his vision was blurry, but he was still conscious and still defiant. "Is that all you've got?" he asked. Vextal's forearms trembled with rage. In 3 years of trying, he had never come close to breaking this human. Every method they tried, every torture device in their arsenal, had failed. Morrison seemed to grow stronger with each attempt to break him. The guards released Morrison from the chair and dragged him back to his cell. His legs wouldn't support him properly after the neural probe, but he forced himself to walk as much as he could. He wouldn't give the other prisoners the sight of him being carried. Back in his cell, Morrison collapsed onto his bench. His head felt like it had been split open with an axe, but he was still himself, still unbroken. He reached up and made another scratch on the wall. 3 years, 2 months, and 16 days. Morrison was doing push-ups when the guards brought her in. He heard the heavy footsteps first, then the familiar hum of an energy field being activated. A new prisoner was being placed in the cell directly across from his. He finished his set of 50 and stood up, wiping sweat from his forehead. Through the blue glow of the energy barriers, he could see a woman with short blonde hair sitting on the bench in the opposite cell. She wore the same type of torn clothing that all prisoners received, but something about her posture seemed familiar. The woman looked up, and Morrison felt his heart skip a beat. "Lisa," he said. Dr. Lisa Grant turned toward his voice, and her face showed recognition. She had been his colleague at the Luna Research Station 5 years ago, before the war started. They had worked together on xenobiology projects, studying alien life forms, and trying to understand how different species evolved. "Jake," she said quietly, "I didn't expect to see you here." Morrison moved closer to the energy field that separated them. Lisa looked older than he remembered. Her face was thinner, and there were dark circles under her blue eyes. Her hands shook slightly as she spoke. "How long have you been here?" Morrison asked. 6 months, Lisa replied. "They captured me during a research mission near the Vega system. My team was studying mineral deposits on an uninhabited planet when their ships appeared." Morrison nodded. He remembered hearing about scientific teams going missing, but he had hoped Lisa was safe back on Earth. Seeing her here filled him with both joy and concern. "What about you?" Lisa asked. "The guards talk about a human who has been here for years." 3 years and change, Morrison said. "Since Kepler Station." Lisa's eyes widened. She had heard about the Battle of Kepler Station. Everyone in the Earth Defense Fleet knew the story. Captain Morrison had held off a Zephyrian invasion force long enough for civilian transports to escape. His small fleet had been destroyed, but thousands of lives had been saved. "You're the one they can't break," she said. Morrison shrugged. "They keep trying. I keep disappointing them." Over the following days, Morrison and Lisa talked whenever the guards allowed it. She told him about her capture and the months she had spent in different Zephyrian facilities. Unlike Morrison, she had not been tortured extensively. The alien seemed more interested in her scientific knowledge than her military secrets. "They asked me about human biology," Lisa explained during one of their conversations. "How our bodies work, what makes us sick, how we reproduce." I answered their questions because the information seemed harmless. Morrison frowned. "Nothing is harmless to them. They use every piece of information as a weapon." Lisa looked down at her hands. "I know that now. But at the time I thought cooperation might improve my situation. The other prisoners who fought back were treated much worse." Morrison studied her face. The Lisa he remembered had been strong and independent, always ready to challenge authority when she thought it was wrong. This version seemed different, more cautious, more willing to accept defeat. "You can't think like that here," Morrison said. "The moment you start cooperating, they own you. The moment you accept that they have power over you, you lose yourself." "Easy for you to say," Lisa replied with a flash of her old spirit. "You're military trained, I'm a scientist. I was taught to share knowledge, not to guard it." Their conversations became a daily routine. Morrison found himself looking forward to talking with someone who understood his references to Earth culture and history. For 3 years, he had been surrounded by aliens and prisoners from other worlds. Having another human to talk to felt like finding water in a desert. But as the weeks passed, Morrison began to notice troubling changes in their discussions. Lisa often spoke about the futility of resistance and the wisdom of accommodation. She would describe the comfortable quarters given to cooperative prisoners and the medical care provided to those who shared information willingly. "They're not monsters, Jake," she said one evening. "They're just different from us. If we try to understand them instead of fighting them, maybe we can find common ground." Morrison stared at her through the energy barrier. "Lisa, they invaded our space. They're killing our people. They're holding us prisoner. How is that not monstrous?" "Because they believe they're bringing order to the galaxy," Lisa replied. "From their perspective, humans are the aggressors. We're expanding too fast, taking resources that other species need." Morrison felt something cold settle in his stomach. These were not the words of the Lisa Grant he had known. The woman he remembered would never have justified the actions of an invading force. Commander Vexital appeared in the corridor, flanked by his usual guards. He stopped between the two cells and looked back and forth between the prisoners. "I trust you two are enjoying your reunion," the alien said through his translator. "Dr. Grant has been most helpful in our research projects. Perhaps she can convince you to be equally cooperative, Captain Morrison." Morrison looked at Lisa, who avoided his gaze. Understanding dawned on him slowly. This was not a coincidence. The Zephyrians had placed Lisa in the cell across from his for a reason. "You're using her," Morrison said to Vextal. "We are offering both of you opportunities," the commander replied. "Dr. Grant has chosen to take advantage of those opportunities. You could do the same." After Vextal left, Morrison and Lisa sat in silence for a long time. Finally, Lisa spoke. "They're right, Jake. We can't win this war. The sooner we accept that, the sooner we can start building something better." Morrison realized that his greatest test was just beginning. 2 months passed, and Lisa's words worked on Morrison like slow poison. Every day brought new conversations that left him feeling drained and uncertain. She never directly asked him to betray military secrets or abandon his principles. Instead, she painted pictures that made his resistance seem pointless and cruel. "Do you remember the coffee shop near the Lunar Research Station?" Lisa asked one morning. "We used to sit there for hours talking about our plans to explore the galaxy peacefully." Morrison remembered. Those had been good days before the war, when humans still believed they could meet alien species as friends rather than enemies. He and Lisa had spent countless evenings discussing the wonders they might discover among the stars. "I remember," Morrison said quietly. "What happened to those dreams, Jake? When did we become soldiers instead of explorers?" Morrison felt the familiar weight of doubt settling on his shoulders. Lisa had a way of asking questions that made him examine his choices in uncomfortable ways. She never attacked his decisions directly, but she made him question whether the path of resistance was the right one. "The Zephyrians made that choice for us when they invaded," Morrison replied, but his voice lacked its usual certainty. Lisa shook her head. "Did they? Or did we make assumptions about their intentions? I've been studying their culture for months now. They're not evil, Jake. They're trying to prevent chaos. Human expansion was disrupting trade routes that dozens of species depend on." Morrison wanted to argue, but Lisa's words carried the weight of scientific analysis. She had always been brilliant at seeing patterns and connections that others missed. During their time at Luna Station, her insights had solved problems that had puzzled researchers for years. "Even if that's true," Morrison said, "invasion isn't the answer. They could have tried diplomacy first." "They did," Lisa replied. "The diplomatic records are all available to cooperative prisoners. The Zephyrian Council sent 12 different diplomatic missions to Earth over a period of 2 years. Human officials refused to meet with most of them, and the ones who did meet were ignored by their governments." Morrison had never heard about diplomatic missions. Military briefings had always portrayed the Zephyrian attack as unprovoked aggression. But Lisa had access to information that he didn't, and she had no reason to lie to him. Over the following weeks, Lisa shared more details about the war that Morrison had never known. She described Zephyrian civilians killed in human raids on mining operations. She talked about refugee camps filled with alien families displaced by human colonial expansion. She painted a picture of conflict where both sides had legitimate grievances. "My brother Danny is probably dead," Lisa said one evening, her voice barely above a whisper. "He was stationed at Proxima Base when the Zephyrians attacked it 6 months ago. No survivors were reported." Morrison felt a stab of pain in his chest. He had known Danny Grant, a young engineer who worshipped his older sister. The kid had been bright and funny, full of plans for the future. "I'm sorry, Lisa. I didn't know." Lisa wiped tears from her eyes. "The worst part is that it didn't have to happen. If we had been willing to negotiate instead of fighting, Danny might still be alive. Thousands of people on both sides might still be alive." Morrison found himself thinking about all the people who had died because of this war. His own crew at Kepler Station, the civilian transports he had saved, which might have been destroyed later in other battles. The endless cycle of violence that seemed to have no end. "Sometimes I wonder if we're fighting for the right reasons," Morrison admitted. "That's all I'm asking you to consider," Lisa said gently. "Maybe resistance isn't always the brave choice. Maybe sometimes the brave choice is to stop fighting and start building something better." Morrison began having trouble sleeping. His dreams were filled with images of Earth under siege and faces of people he had failed to protect. He would wake up wondering if his stubborn resistance was actually preventing peace negotiations that could save lives. Lisa seemed to sense his growing uncertainty. She began sharing memories of their time together at Luna Station, reminding him of the person he had been before the war hardened him. She talked about quiet moments they had shared, professional accomplishments they had celebrated together, and dreams they had both held for humanity's future among the stars. "You used to believe that understanding was more powerful than fighting," Lisa said. "You told me once that the greatest victories came through learning, not through violence." Morrison remembered saying those words. It had been during a late-night conversation about first contact protocols. He had argued that humans should approach alien species with open minds rather than defensive postures. "That was before they started shooting at us," Morrison replied, but the words felt hollow. Was it? Or was it before we started shooting at them? The questions Lisa asked made Morrison examine every assumption he had held about the war. She never pushed too hard or demanded immediate answers. Instead, she planted seeds of doubt that grew stronger with each passing day. Morrison found himself looking forward to their conversations even as they left him feeling confused and isolated. For 3 years, his certainty had been his strength. Now that certainty was cracking and he wasn't sure what would replace it. The Zephyrians watched these exchanges with growing satisfaction. Commander Vextal visited the cells more frequently, observing the changes in Morrison's behavior. The human who had once faced torture with defiant laughter now sat quietly for hours, staring at the walls. "Dr. Grant is proving most useful," Vextal told his subordinates. "The human's psychological defenses are weakening. Soon he will be ready for the final phase." The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning when Lisa received a package from the guards. Morrison watched as she opened the small container and pulled out what looked like a data pad. Her face went pale as she activated the device. "What is it?" Morrison asked. Lisa's hand shook as she held the pad. "Intelligence reports. Commander Vextal said I could review them as part of my cooperative status." She looked up at Morrison with tears in her eyes. "Jake, you need to see this." She turned the device toward him so he could see the screen through their energy barriers. The image showed Morrison's hometown of Cedar Falls, Ohio. But something was wrong with the picture. The streets were empty except for military vehicles, and smoke rose from several buildings in the distance. "This was taken 3 days ago," Lisa said quietly. "The Zephyrian fleet has reached Earth's outer defenses. They're evacuating major population centers." Morrison felt his heart stop. Cedar Falls was where his family lived. His parents, his sister Kate, everyone he had grown up with. The place looked like a ghost town. "Keep watching," Lisa whispered. The image changed to show the main evacuation center. Morrison saw hundreds of people lined up with suitcases and bags, waiting to board transport ships. Then he saw them, his parents, looking older and more frail than he remembered. His father was helping his mother walk, and she seemed, to be having trouble with her legs. But it was his sister Kate who made Morrison's chest tighten with pain. Kate was carrying two small children, his nephew and niece who had been babies when he left for the war. They were older now, maybe 4 and 6 years old, and they looked scared and confused. Kate's face showed the kind of exhaustion that comes from weeks of fear and uncertainty. The evacuation isn't going well, Lisa continued. Transport capacity is limited, and the Zephyrian fleet is moving faster than expected. Military analysts estimate that 60% of Earth's population won't make it off-world before the invasion begins. Morrison watched his family disappear into the crowd of refugees. His parents might not survive the stress of evacuation. Kate might lose her children if the transports were attacked. Everything and everyone he had ever cared about was in danger, and he was sitting in an alien prison cell unable to help. "There's more," Lisa said softly. She activated another file on the data pad. Intelligence reports show Zephyrian battle plans. They're not planning to occupy Earth permanently. They want to use it as an example to other species who might resist their authority. The next images showed detailed plans for orbital bombardment. Entire cities would be destroyed to demonstrate Zephyrian power. Millions of humans would die, not because they posed a military threat, but because their deaths would serve as a warning to other worlds. Morrison felt sick. All his resistance, all his defiance had accomplished nothing. While he sat in his cell feeling proud of his unbreakable spirit, his people were facing extinction. "But there's another option," Lisa said carefully. "Commander Vextal showed me sealed orders from the Zephyrian High Council. They're willing to negotiate limited autonomy for human colonies in exchange for strategic intelligence." Morrison looked at her sharply. "What kind of intelligence?" "Fleet positions, defensive capabilities, supply routes, information that could help them end the war quickly with minimal casualties on both sides." Lisa's voice became urgent. "Jake, they don't want to kill everyone. They want to demonstrate control efficiently, and then move on to other conflicts." Morrison's mind raced. The information they wanted seemed relatively minor compared to the lives that hung in the balance. If cooperation could save even a fraction of Earth's population, wouldn't that be worth more than his personal honor? "They've offered to spare specific colonies," Lisa continued. "Places where families of cooperative prisoners live. Cedar Falls could be on that list, Jake. Your parents, Kate, the kids, they could survive this." Morrison stared at the data pad, which now showed casualty projections for different scenarios. With full human resistance, the models predicted 90% civilian casualties. With limited cooperation providing strategic intelligence, casualties dropped to 30%. Still horrible numbers, but 60% fewer people would die. "The intelligence they want isn't even that sensitive," Lisa argued. "Fleet positions change constantly. Supply routes can be rerouted. Defensive capabilities are already being observed by their scouts. You wouldn't be giving them anything they won't learn anyway." Morrison thought about his nephew and niece, those scared little faces in the evacuation footage. He thought about his parents, who had sacrificed so much to give him the education that led to his military career. He thought about Kate, who had always been proud of her brother, the captain, even when she didn't understand why he had chosen such a dangerous path. For 3.5 years, Morrison had told himself that his resistance mattered, that his refusal to break served some greater purpose. But what purpose was served if everyone he loved died while he maintained his principles? "I need time to think," Morrison said finally. Lisa nodded. "Of course. But don't take too long. The intelligence reports suggest Earth's outer defenses will fall within the next 2 weeks. After that, the bombardment begins." That night, Morrison lay on his hard bench and stared at the ceiling. Every principle he had ever held, every lesson about duty and honor that the military had taught him, warred against the simple human desire to protect the people he loved. By morning, he had made his decision. He would call for Commander Vextal and begin negotiations. His resistance had failed to save anyone, but perhaps his cooperation could save someone. Morrison sat on his bench for hours, preparing the words he would say to Commander Vextal. He had decided to cooperate, to trade military secrets for the lives of his family and other human civilians. The decision felt like swallowing poison, but he couldn't see any other choice. As dawn light filtered through the small window in his cell, Morrison heard Lisa stirring in the cell across from him. She had been the key to breaking him, and part of him resented her for it. But she was also his friend, and she was right about the mathematics of survival. "Good morning, Jake," Lisa said softly. "Did you sleep at all?" "Not much," Morrison replied. "I've been thinking about what you showed me yesterday." Lisa moved closer to her energy barrier. "And? I'm going to call for Vextal. I'll negotiate with them." Lisa's face showed relief, but something else too. Something Morrison couldn't quite identify. "I think you're making the right choice," she said. "Sometimes the brave thing is knowing when to stop fighting." Morrison nodded and was about to signal for the guards when Lisa made a small gesture with her left hand. It was a subtle movement, almost unconscious. Her fingers curved downward while her palm turned slightly upward. Morrison had seen that gesture before, but not from a human. The movement was a Zephyrian sign of respectful submission, used when acknowledging the wisdom of a superior. Morrison had observed it hundreds of times during his interrogations when lower-ranking aliens deferred to Commander Vextal's authority. Morrison felt cold understanding wash over him. No human would naturally adopt alien body language, especially not gestures of submission. The movement had to be learned through long conditioning, practiced until it became automatic. Lisa wasn't just broken. She had been rebuilt. Morrison kept his face carefully neutral as this realization sank in. The woman across from him retained Lisa Grant's memories, her knowledge, her personality. But her core motivations had been rewritten by Zephyrian psychologists. She genuinely believed everything she had told him about cooperation and survival, because they had made those beliefs part of who she was. The Zephyrians hadn't simply convinced Lisa to help them. They had destroyed her original self and constructed a new person using her remains. The Lisa he had known at Luna Station, the brilliant, independent scientist who challenged authority and fought for her principles, was gone forever. Morrison felt rage building in his chest, followed by profound sadness and finally a determination stronger than anything he had experienced in 3.5 years of imprisonment. This wasn't just about military secrets anymore. This was about the fundamental right of thinking beings to remain themselves. Heavy footsteps echoed in the corridor. Commander Vextal approached with his usual escort of guards, clearly expecting Morrison's surrender. The alien's multiple eyes showed satisfaction as he stopped between the two cells. "Captain Morrison," Vextal said through his translator, "Dr. Grant tells me you wish to discuss terms of cooperation." Morrison stood up slowly and looked directly at the alien commander. When he spoke, his voice carried a strength that surprised even himself. "I have a message for you and your High Council," Morrison said. "You couldn't break me with pain, so you broke someone I cared about and used her pieces against me. You've shown me exactly why humanity will never stop fighting you." Vextal's mandibles clicked in confusion. "You were prepared to negotiate. Dr. Grant confirmed this." "Dr. Grant is gone," Morrison replied. "What you've put in her place isn't the woman I knew. You didn't just capture her, you murdered who she was and turned her remains into a weapon." Lisa's face showed hurt and confusion. "Jake, what are you talking about?" "I'm trying to help you save lives." Morrison looked at her with genuine sadness. "I know you believe that. They made sure you would believe it." He turned back to Vextal. "You wanted to demonstrate your superiority by breaking humanity's representatives. Instead, you've shown us exactly what we're fighting against. You don't just want to conquer our worlds, you want to remake us in your image." Morrison's voice grew stronger as he continued. "Every prisoner in this facility needs to understand what you've done to Dr. Grant. They need to see that cooperation doesn't lead to mercy. It leads to the destruction of everything that makes us who we are." Vextal's forearms trembled with, "Your defiance serves no purpose. Your species will be defeated regardless of your cooperation." "Maybe," Morrison said, "but we'll face that defeat as ourselves. not as shadows wearing our own faces. In the days that followed, Morrison began sharing his realization with other prisoners. He explained what had been done to Lisa, how the Zephyrians had turned psychological conditioning into a form of murder. The revelation spread through the prison like wildfire. Prisoners who had been broken by torture began to remember their own strength. Species that had never worked together before started planning coordinated resistance. Morrison's example reminded them that even in the darkest circumstances, they could choose how to face whatever came. Lisa continued trying to convince Morrison to cooperate, never understanding that she was no longer the person making those arguments. Morrison treated her with kindness but refused to let her words affect his resolve. He had learned to tell the difference between the voice of a friend and the echo of an enemy's manipulation. Commander Vextal had intended to demonstrate Zephyrian superiority by breaking the unbreakable human. Instead, he had created something far more dangerous, a symbol of resistance that would inspire rebellion across the galaxy. Morrison sat in his cell, adding another scratch to the wall. 3 years, 8 months and 12 days, still unbroken, still himself, still human.